Biggly Piggly Wiggly on Spring Street has served 3 generations of shoppers since 1955 as the largest locally owned independent grocery store in the area. The Joseph family owners grew up here, so you know they're invested in the community. They provide the biggest variety of choice meats, the freshest produce, an in-house deli bakery, great wine selection, and more of your favorite brands. Every purchase gives you gasoline points so you can save at our pumps. Order online for pickup at bigglypigglywiggly.com. Biggly Piggly Wiggly on Spring Street. No one beats the pig.
The opinions expressed on Scoop Squad Truth Pod are those of the hosts and the guests and not those of WVRC Media. The Scoop Squad Truth Pod, copyright 2024. Scoop Squad Truth Squad, LLC.
Welcome to the Scoop Squad Truth Pod, and I'm your host, Ashley Switzer. I'm here with my executive producer, Ron Hughes.
Hello, everybody.
And we're coming to you from Charleston, West Virginia, like we always do. We're in a different studio. We recorded in this studio before.
Yes.
So it's not entirely new, but it always throws me off a little bit when we do something different. We've also got a few canine friends in the studio with us.
Well, maybe we should introduce their owner first.
Yeah. So their owner is actually co-founder, deputy director and board member of War Dog Guardians, which is a nonprofit focusing on rescuing former military dogs and placing them with American war veterans, which is totally cool.
We wanted to set that up because you will hear the dogs, until they settle down.
They'll settle down,
which is fine because we love dogs.
But their owner is Max Fisher. Max, welcome to the Scoop Squad Truth Pod. Hey, Ron, can you introduce our guest here?
Yeah, Max was born in Russia, grew up in New York. I think he's lived in Philadelphia and Texas. He is an ambassador and special advisor for Faith and Freedom, the West Virginia chapter. And back in November, he took a trip to Israel with 3 North Carolina politicians, including Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. So he has an inside perspective, fairly recent, of the activities between Israel and Hamas. He's been interviewed on TV, interviewed by Mark Curtis, and has written some op-eds, including Standing with Israel in Its Time of Need, Horrors, Survivors, Support, and Winning the War Against Evil. Now, last week, if you remember, if you caught last week's episode, and if you didn't, you may want to stop here, go back, and listen to that.
They're having a good time
because
over there.
We had 2 ladies from the Muslim faith community who were attempting to have Charleston City Council write resolutions asking for peace. And they gave
asking for a ceasefire.
The ceasefire, I'm sorry.
Yep.
And they did a pretty good job of explaining their point of view, and but their point is that Israel is taking a lot of innocent lives that maybe don't need to be taken by being so aggressive.
Well, and I have to say, I have to jump in here because Max, we scheduled this podcast. We booked you a long time ago.
That's right.
And before we, last week's podcast was actually kind of a spontaneous situation.
In response to the failed resolution at City Council.
I reached out to the people that were in attendance and asked them to come on and explain their anger and frustration, because I think a lot of us didn't. There was a lot of people didn't understand why they were so angry.
Mm-hmm.
And so we invited them on to kind of just give us the backstory of what had, led up to that moment.
Sure.
But I don't think that God's timing is ever a mistake. And so I think it's pretty fascinating that we have, had a chance to hear from the Muslim community about
Sure.
their ceasefire, and then to have you come on as a member of the Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think it's pretty cool. It should be a fascinating discussion.
Well, I know it will be, and thank you so much for having me on. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here, and it's there is so much to dig through in this issue. There are so many things right now that are going on simultaneously, and I think that education is going to be a cornerstone for people to understand properly what is going on and make up their own minds about issues. And ultimately, I do really believe that the people that you're talking about that were here last week, I don't know who they are. I am utterly convinced that they and myself do not want the killing of innocents. The question is, how do we get here, and how does it stop?
I also want to mention we have Elisa Payne here, who is a regular guest and also one of our sponsors. She has Eggplant on Bridge Road. But Elisa will be a voice that you've heard before, so she'll be chiming in from time to time. She's not going to have to say, "This is Elisa." You'll remember her voice from previous
she's
episodes.
a lot. My voice and her voice are very distinguishable. So I'm a little louder than she is. But she was also at City Council with me that evening, and then with me today over at the King Center. So let's just start with education.
We're recording a little early this week to accommodate Max's schedule. So we're recording on Monday, Martin Luther King Day, which is the day of the special event.
Right. So when you talk about education, Max, what is it that you think someone like me who's just learning about a lot of this should know?
Well, I think maybe it would be good for me to first start talking about the trip that I took.
Sure.
And then to use that to go into a lot of different places, starting earlier in the 20th century and also moving ahead to solutions. So if you don't mind, I'll start there.
Absolutely. Sure. When did you take this trip?
It was in early November, so it wasn't too far after October 7th.
Had it already been planned before October 7th?
It was planned for a much longer time, and then it wasn't clear if anybody was going to go. And, Faith and Freedom is the organization that put the trip together. They're a nonprofit. And
Tell us a little bit more about them before we get too far.
Sure. They educate citizens, voters, and politicians in all levels of government on the issues that they care about. Family, pro-life, prison reform is a big one. Human trafficking has become a big one.
Have we had some Faith and Freedom guests on before? It seems like we
Curtis
have.
Workman, yes,
Okay.
the executive director for West Virginia chapter.
There we go.
Yes.
Israel is a very big one for them, as well as others. And they asked me to go sort of as a delegate from West Virginia. And I said yes. I told them that I would go under any circumstances because for a while it wasn't quite clear if this trip was going to happen or not. And we ended up going with 3 politicians from North Carolina, 2 state senators, and Lieutenant Mark Robinson. And it was a very, very intense trip. It was a very emotional trip. And we flew there. We hit the ground running. We first met with the government, with the Foreign Affairs Office. And then right after that, we saw video footage that, at least at that time, many people have not seen. And I think that there's still some footage that we saw that people have not seen. So that was the onslaught of Hamas coming through the borders and starting to indiscriminately kill people, civilians. Then it moves on to the killing of children. Then it moves on to what you see as the beginnings of rape. It goes on to the video that affected me the most was the one where they took a gentleman, I imagine in his late 20s, put him in a corner, took his young wife, cut open her stomach because she was pregnant, took out the baby, showed it to him, shot him, cut the baby in half, and then let her bleed out. There were other videos where you had a Hamas member that was calling his mother, and in the same way that maybe a West Virginia high school kid would say, hey, I just scored a goal on the football field, or I won a wrestling match, or whatever, was saying how he was so proud of himself because he had killed 8 Jews.
How did you access this video footage?
Well, it's really interesting. So Hamas did us one favor. They took most of the footage themselves.
Oh, well, the Nazis did that in Germany. They documented everything they did to the Jews.
Most of it was from Hamas. There is other video footage then by the time that you had some police come, and you also had some very brave people that got out their phones and started to videotape as well.
Some Israelis did that.
Israelis, and also, to be clear, it's not just Jews that got killed. You had people from Thailand. Mm-hmm. You had people from Africa. You also had Muslim Arabs, which we'll get to that. 20% of Israel are all Arab. They are integrated into every single last element of life, including the Knesset, which is their version of Congress. That's not to say that relations are perfect, but give me a country that has perfect relations, given any kind of difference in ethnicities or whatever else that doesn't exist anywhere. But we'll get to that later. There's peaceful coexistence between the Israeli Arabs that make up 20% of Israel and the rest of the people.
So some of them were killed as well.
Yeah, and there was one video where there was an Arab Israeli who kept on saying, I'm Muslim, I'm Muslim. They didn't care because to them that person is simply just a traitor.
A stooge.
A stooge, exactly, and that person had to go too. There are video footage of the rape was brutal, mostly of women, some of men too. Mm-hmm. There's one where a woman gets raped, and then at the same time, somebody takes a box cutter out and cuts off her breasts, and then they play with it like a football in the street. Mm. So we saw that. When we were down at Kfar Aza, which is one of the kibbutz, a kibbutz is a farm. That's what that is. And also to explain to you about these farmers in the south, these kibbutzim. These are... the left doesn't have the same connotations in Israel as it does in the United States. It's a different kind of left. But they love peace and coexistence, and part of their spiritual mission is to live on the border with the Arabs and to facilitate peace. There's a very rich Israeli in the tech world who purposely built a manufacturing plant. I believe his name is Mr. Alvin. It's evading my mind right now. You can look it up online. He built a manufacturing plant and only hired Gazans. Salary and equity in the company as well. And his daughter and her future husband both massacred at the music festival. And he also was one of these Israelis that believes that coexistence is possible. So that's something to say about them. When I was at Kfar Aza, there's an organization there that's called Zaka, Z-A-K-A, and they are a religious organization. Not only Jews, there are some Muslims there too, and also some Druze. We'll get to the Druze. And their job is to literally find every single last piece of body and blood for a proper burial. And in our delegation, somebody asked them, they said... well, what do you do when you come across a terrorist body? Because eventually the IDF got there and the police got there and etc.
Right.
And the gentleman kind of looked confounded, and he says, what do you mean? We do the same for them that we do for our own, and we then send the body to Gaza. So there were two things there that were very evident to me. Number one, they're better men than I am. That's for sure. And two, that right there is the axiom, is the access line for what I really see as a clash of civilizations. On one side, you have the Western world, and on the other side, you have radical Islam. And we'll get to that later. Radical Islam, ever since basically Obama, is something really you sort of can't even say out loud. It's been taken out of all FBI manuals, all CIA manuals.
As a politically correct,
yeah, because
or politically incorrect term, I guess.
Exactly, and because for him, all terrorism is terrorism, and there's really there's nothing. Their religion does not drive it, even if it's an iteration of a certain religion, right? So we'll get to that, but then after that, we went back to Jerusalem and we met with the families of people that had died. The hardest was meeting with the families of hostages. And then we met with two Druze families. Now, the Druze are an Arabic people that are beloved in Israel, and they left Islam 1,000 years ago. And I don't claim to know much about the religion. It seems like it is a combination of Abrahamic faith and really some Buddhism too, is what I saw, because they believe in reincarnation. That's why I say that.
Okay.
And they have been an incredible asset to Israel. And they also have this warrior ethos in their culture. So
I think a lot of us probably 20 years ago heard the term Druze militia a lot in fighting.
Yes, that's a familiar term.
yeah, and they a lot of the young men start going to military school and high school.
Okay.
Israel doesn't have the Naval Academy. It doesn't have West Point. If you really want to do that, you could start as early as 14. You basically are going to a military high school. And so two of the Druze got killed on October 7th. One was 2 days away from retirement, couldn't get his unit together. He literally hopped in his tank by himself and went down there.
Wow.
The other one was in Special Forces and went down there and he died. There was a lot of that happened on the 7th and on the 8th and the 9th for that matter. A friend of mine in Florida, whose name I'm not going to say, is a Special Forces reservist, and he lost 13 men on the 7th and 8th between those 2 days. And we sat with them, and they, of course, were, they were honored to have. They liked the fact that people from the United States came and sat with them and listened to stories about their sons, etc. And there was one of the fallen soldiers' cousin said, my cousin, she spoke all these wonderful things about him, and then he said, he died fighting for his country. And as custom would have it, all of the Americans had to get up and say something. And we don't know the family, so, you say what you can.
Right.
And when I got up, I said, your son didn't just die fighting for your country. He died fighting for my country, too. Because this is intolerable. And we have seen this in ISIS. We've seen this in 9/11. We've seen this irrespective. I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole. Was Iraq the right decision or not? Or should we stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years? What I'm here to say is that radical Islam is real. Obama can say it's not all he wants. It's real.
How does the Biden administration, is that just a carryover from Obama when it comes to terrorism?
I think it's about 85% there. Mm-hmm. He has been better on it. Biden has kind of been speaking out of both sides of his mouth. And we're going to get to that too, because what my punchline in today is going to be actually that by the end of this, I may come across as a very, very, I am an Israeli war hawk, no doubt about it, and I'm very conservative. However, you have to understand the problem in order to save the kids in Gaza, because they are dying.
Right.
That is true. That's not some kind of myth. It's called war. And there are casualties in war no matter how many...
Oh, there were civilian casualties in World War II.
There were civilian casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan, no matter how many precautions you take. And the IDF loses soldiers by giving away their position all the time. There still are going to be casualties, especially when Hamas uses them as human shields. But we'll get to that later.
Right.
We met with essentially the Israeli military intelligence. They talked to us about the threat from the north, which is Hezbollah, and what is going on in Lebanon, what is going on in Syria. We were right there in the Golan Heights on the border of Syria and Lebanon. We met with some nonprofits that were filling in the gap because the government has been completely, totally overloaded with what's been going on. Mm-hmm. We went to the old city of Jerusalem, too. And we saw they recently found the old city of David, like the real Jerusalem, the old city. And so they're excavating that now too. Many of the people there in the tourism business we didn't see them, unfortunately, but they were telling that every couple of years now they're finding another first century synagogue. And a first century synagogue, you have to also understand, is where your Christian roots lie as well.
Right.
And so we met with reporters. We met with people from the news press. Not all of them were conservative. I think a lot of people don't realize just how many kind of liberal Israeli left people you have in Israel.
Are there very many press entities that are liberal and Like newspapers, or is it mostly digital or broadcast?
I think it's all of it, and I think that now there's a great change that has come. It's also come in the United States because, look, you guys have Easter, we have Passover, right? So in Passover, you get together with your family. It's like big Jewish Thanksgiving.
Right.
And for the last 10 to 12 years, I'm the conservative guy sitting at the table making everybody mad. And nobody has anything to say anymore to me. They have nothing to say. And that gets into the discussion about what happened in Israel. And that then gets into the discussion what has happened on our university campuses as well, which is a separate thing altogether. Anyway, when all the politicians from North Carolina were very affected by this, and when we left, I got close with our security detail. And these were Jews that are from Yemen. By the way, this is another interesting thing. The 50-60% of Jews in Israel don't look like me. They don't have blue eyes.
Right.
I'm an Ashkenazi European Jew. What does that mean? That means we went north, most likely sometime during the time of Rome, or maybe afterwards.
Yeah, the diaspora.
The diaspora. And then, there was intermarriage that happened over the course of 1,500, 2,000 years or whatever. You've got black Jews. You've got many Jews that are coming from Africa. You've got very dark-skinned Jews that are coming from Yemen and Morocco and Tunisia.
Well, when there's a diaspora, it's very effective, and they were just sent everywhere to try to diminish the Jewish faith.
Yep.
And this was the Roman government that also destroyed the temple.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have synagogues, because there was no temple.
That's very true. That's very true.
How are we on time? So we got...
Okay. You want to take a break? Are we ready to break?
Yeah, let's take a break. Let's acknowledge some of our sponsors. Chris Walters at Integrity Insurance, offering auto, home, life, business, workers' compensation. And Max, you may be interested that they have pet insurance. So
$40 a month. It's
health
worth
insurance
it.
for your dog or cat covers specialty food or illnesses, surgeries, medication. They're at 16 Capitol Street, Charleston, 346-9181. Also at iigwv.com. As we mentioned, also Eggplant on Bridge Road. Anything but ordinary, eggplantshop.com. Also T-Graphics on the west side on Buchanan Street. They're at tgraphics.com. Screen printing and embroidery since 1984. 345-4816. Also by Jody's Mobile Services. You can look up Jody online. On Facebook especially, see some examples of their work. But they do pressure washing, steam cleaning of buildings, commercial vehicles, houses, things like that.
Not my car.
But not your car. It hasn't touched it. And, of course, Bigley Piggly Wiggly, one of our main sponsors, on Spring Street. When they say no one beats the pig, they mean it. They mean it. It's great. It's a great place. Family-owned since the 1950s. So let's take a break, and we will be back in a few moments. The Scoop Squad Truth Pod would like to thank our sponsors. Those include Chris Walters at Integrity Insurance, featuring auto, home, life, business, workers' compensation, and pet insurance. Pet insurance, you say? That's health insurance for your dogs or cats that covers special foods, illnesses, surgeries, and medication. They're on 16 Capitol Street in Charleston at 346-9181, or reach them at www.iigwv.com. Also by Jody's Mobile Services, offering steam cleaning, pressure washing, fleet washing, and auto detailing. We come to you. They're at 304-437-3164. And also by Eggplant on Bridge Road. Anything but ordinary. Go to eggplantshop.com. Also by T-Graphics on the west side, 312 Buchanan Street, 345-4816. Go to tgraphics.com for screen printing and embroidery since 1984. Again at 345-4816.
And we're we're back. You're back with the second scoop of the Scoop Squad Truth Pod. We are here with Max Fisher and his war dogs, which have settled down, and they are fascinated by the discussion, as am I. So, Max, you were telling us about your solidarity trip to Israel. Yep. Why don't you finish up on that and tell us what your major takeaway was there?
Just real quick to wrap it up, when I was leaving, I spoke to one of the security detail guys, and I said, "So what are you doing now? Like, what are you doing tomorrow?" And he goes, "Well, in a couple of days I'm going to Gaza." And it was at that point that I started to cry, because I said, I get to go back to the United States, and for me, I left Russia and we left to go to Israel. We were supposed to go there. We had family there, still have family there. I was a kid. The truth was that my mother was going to go to the United States. She just didn't tell anybody. I grew up here just because my mom made one decision and not another decision. So it's important for me to take advantage of the kind of opportunities that you guys are giving to discuss this. And it truly is to educate and to advocate, but it also is to really start figuring out how to come up with a solution to a problem that seems to never end.
Speaking of solutions, our guest last week called very vehemently for a ceasefire. Mm-hmm. How does that come across to you?
How can that? Yeah. How is that going to work?
Is that something that is possible, or what do you think about that?
I'm going to imagine that what this lady would like is for innocents not to die. And if she's listening to this, I would tell her that I don't want them to die either. But we have to take a sober look as to how we got here. And I'm going to run you through some quick history, which people go and get PhDs in and master degrees in and whatever, and I'll try to go and be as succinct as possible.
Great.
Perfect.
You had the Ottoman Empire. Let's start there. We're not going to start with the fact that there are archaeological evidence of Jews and the Canaanites and the Israelites being there for more than 3,000 years. We now have DNA evidence that even Ashkenazi Jews, because sometimes we've been questioned because of our lighter hair and lighter skin color,
from Europe,
have direct connection to the Canaanites and Israelites. It's a scientific fact at this point.
Yes, nobody's arguing the existence of those.
Right.
Of that.
So we then go to the Ottoman Empire. At the end of World War I, the Brits and their allies, they win.
Right. The Ottoman Empire had been in control. They came out of Turkey in the Middle Ages, had almost overtaken Europe completely. If they hadn't been stopped in Vienna, the gates of Vienna, they would have been completely all over Europe, and the world would be a little bit different. So the Ottoman Empire was in charge, for hundreds and hundreds of years, concentrated in the Middle East.
That's all exactly right. And at the end of all that, Britain had a relationship with the Arabic tribes, and it had relations with the European Jews as well as the Jews who had been staying there in Israel.
If you've seen Lawrence of Arabia, you kind of get a feel for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you go to the late 1800s, there are many who said this, but the best example is Mark Twain, because he's a prolific writer. He went over to the Holy Land, and you could do your own research. He keeps on writing about the fact that he doesn't see anybody there except empty land and more empty land and more empty land. It was not built up. We have a movement called Zionism that starts in the late 1800s by a guy named Theodor Herzl. And he starts to basically advocate for Jews in Europe to move to Israel and to settle there. And there starts to be a Ashkenazi immigration to the land of Israel. It's also important to understand that the Europeans went through the Industrial Revolution. They're not better or worse. They just happened to go through that. They happened to go through the economic know-how of building businesses and other things and medicine and all sorts of different things that happened specifically in Europe, and they just happened to be there. When they got to Israel, which is really a pretty bad piece of real estate for growing things on, for cultivating, the economy started to rise, and there were many Arabs who started to move there as well.
And that whole area was called Palestine at the time, was it not?
It was called many things, but yes, it was called Palestine at that time. But Palestine was not necessarily tied to the Palestinians.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That comes in the
Completely
1960s and not before. There's no such thing as Palestinians at that time, not the way that we understand it today. You have the Peel Commission that is advocating for a two-state solution. And the British mandate at that time, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize, was the size of all of Jordan Kingdom, which is now present-day Jordan, and all of Israel. That was all supposed to be, by the standards of the League of Nations, that was all supposed to go to the Jews. Half of that, which is now Jordan, went to the Hashemite kingdom, and okay, they lost that pretty soon, no problem. The rest of it, then it went back to the Brits, and then eventually the UN took it up. And there was supposed to be a two-state solution. That two-state solution created what we now know as the West Bank, Gaza plus, and then this little blip in the north that is very close to Lebanon. That was supposed to be the land for the Arabs, and what Israel was left with was hardly anything.
And this was after World War II.
This is after World War II, exactly. This is in 1948. Before that, you have skirmishes between the Jews and the Arabs. You have a massacre in Iraq. You also have, and this gets into Hajj Amin Husseini, who's the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who is tied to Hitler. And do your own research about this. Mm-hmm. There is a time here. What happens is that Hitler in Germany needs oil, and they also want to get rid of their Jews. And the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem is very concerned about all these Jews coming to the Middle East, and therefore he's not going to give them the oil that they want. I'm not saying that this guy convinced Hitler to go from eradicating all the Jews to killing all the Jews, but he definitely did not help.
Well, if there was no place to send them, what's Hitler going to do?
That was the way that he saw it. Hajj Amin Husseini was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was deeply anti-Semitic, and he was really, people kind of look at him as the father of terrorism. We get to the two-state, the two-state idea of the UN. The Jews accept it. The Arabs don't. Next day, you've got 5 Arab countries that all attack Israel at the same time. And Israel, however it does it, wins that war. And then we have a problem. The problem is, so this is a very interesting thing. Why do you have Israeli Arabs? Like, what are they doing there, and why is there basically no problem with them? Because at that time, you had Arabs that stayed home, locked their doors, and did not get involved in this war. They are now, their descendants, their kids, their grandkids, are now the Israeli Arab citizens with full rights and everything else. The other Arabs left, and they joined the other Arab countries in attacking Israel. So after that all happens, and they're supposed to win the war, the Arabs were promised that this war is going to be won by all of the other Arab nations, but they lost and Israel won. So what do you do now? You have a whole contingency of people that have just been screaming for your death. And they don't want to just kick you out of there. They want every single last Jew dead, and they want all the land. Mm-hmm. And that's what that is. That is what started this problem. And a lot of these Arabs were put into what is now the West Bank and to Gaza. Next interesting fact, and if you're listening, do your own research. From 1948 to 1967, the West Bank was administered by Jordan. Gaza was administered by Egypt. They had from 1948 to 1967 to set up a two-state solution. They could have annexed them completely into their countries, or they could have said, you guys get your own Palestine. They didn't. Why? Because the Arab world is not interested in that. The Arab world is interested in using the Palestinians, the Arabs that are local to that area, as a stick to beat Israel with. And fundamentally, the reason why they do it is because in Islam, once you hold land, you cannot give it up. It is shameful to Allah to do so. And that's another part of all this. We can get to this, but this is the way that religion drives things in the Middle East.
Right.
In 67, there's another war.
Right.
They try to do it again. They're supposed to win, but they don't. Israel wins again. And Israel says, sorry, we can't have you administer the West Bank and Gaza anymore because you're attacking us. You're using this as launch pads to attack us. So they start to administer security there and other things. And of course, now you have Muslims that are being administered not by other Muslims, but by Jews. That is a very, very big problem. People in the United States need to understand that they have to take off their Western headset. And they have to forget everything that they know and try to understand the mindset of how Islam fuels culture in the Middle East. And I want to be really clear about a number of things. There are billion plus great Muslims that are living their lives, having their kids, going to their jobs, going to their schools, minding their own business and doing everything. But there is an extremism in radical Islam that has not given that up, and it has not reformed.
Yeah, that's one thing that I didn't ask our guests of last week about. Do you think that, for instance, the guests that we had on last week would acknowledge that there is a such thing as radical Islam? I mean, Elisa, what do you have to say about that?
Well, the other thing I just wanted to ask real quickly, but don't you think that there's a difference between the people that are living in these countries and their governing bodies? As we're seeing in the United States, there's corruption that exists in our government. I would say that's probably some things that you talked around the dinner table with your family during the times of Passover that no one wanted to listen to, and yet these things are meting out as we speak. We're seeing the Biden administration following in the footsteps in Obama and supporting Iran, sending billions of dollars to those countries. So I think we definitely need to make a point of separating the people
from their
governments. And I also have done some research and came across a document called the Balfour Declaration, which wasn't as altruistic as your portrayal of events.
Sure.
And these were people that wanted just to move the Jews out of wherever they weren't wanted and put them where they wanted to put them.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's true. The Balfour Declaration is a lot more complicated than people make it out to be. That's 100% true. And there are two sides of it. One is that it did represent, honestly, people in Britain that wanted Jews to find a homeland, but it also wanted to get them out of there, too.
Yeah, there was political. It was the Crown and the Rothschilds, and there was a lot of money involved in that.
That is very true. That is very true.
And I think that's what leads me to wonder or to question the sincerity of the governments in concerning the will of their people and what's best for their people and what's best for them.
The problem is that you've got over 20 Arab nations, and each one of them has their own story in that regard. And so how does that play out? And that is a conversation that is probably, too much for any one podcast. Unfortunately, my belief is that Islam runs very deep in the Middle East. And this idea that there is a great difference between the government and the people it represents is somewhat true, but it is not nearly as true as people think it is. I'll give you an example. After official Hamas came through the breach in the wall, there were thousands of regular citizens that came with shovels, baseball bats, and everything else. There is a hatred there towards mostly Jews, but Christians as well, that is something that is very difficult for the Western mind to understand. Mm-hmm. And the best way that I could say it is we don't have an audio, we don't have a visual here, it's an audio, but I'm putting my hand in front of my head. Religion is here. It's not here like it is in the United States. Even people that are quite religious, whether they're Christians or Hindus or whatever else, it is up front right over here, and it is something that is fueling so much of this, which is why you have to be, in my opinion, very careful as to how people are going to navigate and translate the doctrines that are in these that are these religious texts.
You spoke about the breach. From my understanding, the Israeli government and the IDF are one of the best, if not the best, military honed in the world.
Yep.
The dome is something that most people haven't even heard of, much less conceptualized, because it's just fascinating. So how did this breach happen? I mean, you have a rogue bunch of terrorists. It's certainly not in the thousands or tens of thousands against a military army that is honed and trained for years. From what I understand, a cat can't even walk up to that fence without not only alerting the IDF, but then immediately calling for backup.
Mm-hmm. I think the real story is going to come out after this war is over, because I don't think that anybody truly knows. I also don't think that there is only one variable to it. I think it's a multivariable. It's going to be a multivariable explanation.
In your opinion, was there somebody on the inside sabotaging the defenses?
No, I think that what you have is that you have Israeli generals in the south that are kind of left. And they started writing that, listen, there are many people in Israel, like here in America, that think that this is a matter of resources. This is a matter of delineation of lines. That if you just give them X and Y and Z, it's really about that. And the religiosity is really just blanketing the thing that it is that they really want. No, that's not the case. That's not the case. Their religiosity, in terms of radical Islam, is fueling all of this. And we know this because in ISIS you had PhDs and doctors and lawyers and highly educated people that are still willing to do things that are absolutely, totally insane. So that's my opinion about it. But that is one aspect of it. I think there are others. I think they started to rely too much on AI technology. I think they started to rely too much on machinery rather than eyes and ears on the ground.
Okay.
So
satellite and so forth.
And again, you mentioned delineating of lines, and I'm looking at maps over the history from the 40s to the present day, where the land of the Palestinian, starting from before there were Palestinians, but that land has shrunk to almost nothing as of today. As a matter of fact, the UN said that it is basically an open prison. There's high walls, there's razor wire. They have to have permission from the government of Israel to go into Israel.
Did you
to
see
work.
that wall? Did you see that when you were there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a major wall.
And so that's so what we see with that wall is what you saw, right?
Without a doubt. The maps that the UN show are propaganda pieces. I know exactly the maps that you're referring to. There's 4 of them. They show pre-1948, the 48, then the 67, and then what is happening today. The first map is a propaganda lie where they show all of this green, which is Palestine, and these white dots there that are Israel. They're not taking account for population centers, and they're also not signifying, first of all, the south is a Negev desert. There's not a lot of people there to start with, and that actually ended up being the land that they offered the Jews primarily. Every single time the map changes, it is because Israel gets attacked. When you get attacked, you have to take strategic depth. So that's part of it. So those maps are fantastically misleading. If we're talking about the same one that I've seen that the UN constantly tout around. Gaza is controlled on the north by Israel. It's also controlled in the south by Egypt. Egypt can open up that border whenever it is that they like. They did administrate Gaza all the way to 1967. They could open up the gate now too. They can let them all out. They can take them all in, but they don't. Just like the West Bank, Jordan won't take any of those Palestinians either.
Neither will Egypt.
And neither will Egypt. So Gaza, when Gaza was left in 2005, Gaza has been given so much technology and money, not just by Israel and the United States and the rest of the world and the UN. They could have built Dubai already 10 times over, but they choose not to. They built 300 miles of underground tunnels for the purpose of Hamas. They build really what Gaza is a military-industrial complex that disguises itself as some kind of functioning society. It's the hospitals, schools, and everything else.
But I would submit that the military-industrial complex is a part of every nation in this world.
I'm talking about it a little bit differently, not the way that I would talk about it as a business in the United States, but literally as a fortress. The buildings in Gaza are there to launch missiles, to house Hamas. Now that's where many of the hostages has been, presumably.
Let's take this moment to take a break.
Sure.
We've got just a few minutes left, and we'll take a break and come right back. You're listening to the Scoop Squad Truth Pod. The Scoop Squad Truth Pod would like to thank our sponsors. Those include Chris Walters at Integrity Insurance, featuring auto, home, life, business, workers' compensation, and pet insurance. Pet insurance, you say? That's health insurance for your dogs or cats that covers special foods, illnesses, surgeries, and medication. They're on 16 Capitol Street in Charleston at 346-9181, or reach them at www.iigwv.com. Also by Jody's Mobile Services, offering steam cleaning, pressure washing, fleet washing, and auto detailing. We come to you. They're at 304-437-3164. And also by Eggplant on Bridge Road. Anything but ordinary. Go to eggplantshop.com. Also by T-Graphics on the west side, 312 Buchanan Street, 345-4816. Go to tgraphics.com for screen printing and embroidery since 1984. Again at 345-4816.
And you're listening to the Scoop Squad Truth Pod. We are back for our third scoop of this fascinating and rather heavy subject that we're on.
It's this one could go into 4 or 5 different podcasts. There's enough material here, enough history.
I mean, what an education.
But,
and to sit here and to get firsthand, experience is very fascinating.
Need to see where we can go from here. I think it's not easy, but it never has been.
Yep.
I mean, 1967 wasn't the last time Israel was attacked. It was also attacked in 1973.
Yep.
And every time it was attacked, they came up with more territory that they took from the Arab enemies. So let's kind of look at where we know how we got here. Now let's see what are the options from here, where things might go.
Well, the option is not a two-state solution. That's the first thing. It's already been tried about 5 or 6 times, and it's failed 5 or 6 times. Because fundamentally, at that time at least, the Arab world do not want a two-state solution. The problem for Israel would be that if you gave actual sovereignty right now, today, to the West Bank and to Gaza, a sovereign nation can do things like import arms, be a staging place for whatever it wanted to be.
Raise a military.
There's another thing that we haven't really touched on that I'll touch on for a moment, is that the other important thing here to understand right now is that Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north are really the two claws of Iran, that a lot of these decisions are being made in Tehran right now.
Well, they seem to be coordinated almost. I mean, it seems like the attacks are timed to be very similar from the north and the south.
And the reason why is because of the Abraham Accords, which is someplace that which is I think a great thing to talk about.
Sure.
And one of the greatest movements of progress in the Middle East.
In my research too, I'm understanding that Hamas was actually created by Israel to combat Yasser Arafat. So are you saying at this point that Hamas was started as a good thing for Israel and then has gone rogue?
So I don't know that much about it. I would completely believe that Hamas would be supported back in the day by Netanyahu, obviously not to attack Israel, but to divide and conquer our enemy, absolutely. Because Hamas went to war with the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and Abbas and all of those people. And if you have your enemies fighting each other, like we did in Iraq and Iran for a long time, that means that the heat stays off of you.
Right.
Sure. If that, to what extent that is the case, it has completely gotten away with whoever instituted that in the first place. For example,
Which would have been under Netanyahu, who's currently in authority
absolutely.
once again.
And I don't think he's going to survive, by the way, after this whole thing. I don't think that he's going to politically survive.
Do you think
Well, I
this
would
has
think
to be
not.
over first before he's ousted, or do you think
Yeah,
something may
because I
happen?
think they're too weary about kind of changing generals mid-war. But
Right.
after this is done, I don't think he's going to be politically survive this. And here's the reason why: because even all the people on the left who don't like him, the one thing that they have always given him credit for is security.
Right.
And he failed on that front, so I think he's going to have to go. But in terms of solutions, possible solutions. We could all take a note from the Abraham Accords. So what's going on with that right now? Well, what's going on is that Netanyahu and Trump overturned an axiom. They said, what if we don't have to first have peace with the Palestinians in order to get a general peace with the other Arab nations? What if we go around them rather than through them? And they made a peace, Israel made a peace with the United Arab Emirates and with Bahrain. And in the United Arab Emirates, they now have built synagogues and churches, and they now have Holocaust education. This was unheard of 20 years ago. This was something that could have never, ever happened. Now, why are they doing it? Well, they're doing it because there's a much bigger enemy on the block, and that's Iran. And at the end of the day, the United Arab Emirates know that Israel is not interested in taking them over. That's not a thing. Saudi Arabia knows that too. The Hamas attack happened right when the Abraham Accords were almost solidified with Saudi Arabia. That's when it happened. It hasn't derailed it completely, but it might, right? So you now have Saudi Arabia, if they keep on going with the Abraham Accords, and you've got Bahrain, and you've got the United Arab Emirates that are, and I can't stress how important this is, they are re-educating their people. So in Gaza, starting at age 3 to 4, they have a Mickey Mouse sort of character that teaches every kid to hate Jews and Christians, and success for them is how many Jews they kill. Their teenage sons here in America can go to football camp or art camp or drama camp or wrestling camp. There, they go to Hamas camp and they learn how to be terrorists. This indoctrination starts at a very young age. United Arab Emirates is inviting Jews over to go to their mosques because their plan is to keep Islam but leave the violence behind, and the only thing that they're against is extremism in any form. It's working, which is absolutely, totally incredible.
Well, you mentioned Iran. So, and going back a little bit in recent history, Obama and recently the Biden administration have both sent billions of dollars over there.
Yep.
So what is the United States position? Are we supporting Israel or are we supporting terrorism? I mean, if Iran seems to be the power point of where this is funneling, fueling, being funded, then why are we sending the money?
I don't know. I would love to know myself, I'm not entirely sure. I think that, look, I think that with Obama, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I'll say this really quickly. Do you remember the Arab Spring?
Yes.
This is the beginning of Israel's problem with Obama. Israelis are very liberal people. When there was Obama, good-looking Obama, a black American Obama got elected, they were dancing in the streets for joy. They thought it was just the greatest thing since sliced bread. The rift between Obama and Israel started in the Arab Spring. Why? Because the other paradigm in the Middle East are these military dictatorships that are not great, but they do keep order, and they don't like radical Islam. They don't tolerate it. When they opened up free elections at that time during the Arab Spring, well, guess what happened? People voted for the Muslim Brotherhood. And from Obama's standpoint, from a very self-indulgent Western standpoint, it was like, well, great, they're going to be a democracy. But democracy, how? Like what? They're now going to vote in all of the radical elements of Islam.
And then where does democracy go after that?
It dies a couple of years afterwards. And Israel's position was to keep the military power in these Arab states because at the very least there, you know that when you are negotiating with somebody, you actually are negotiating with somebody who is able to institute whatever it is that he is saying that he's going to institute. So that's another matter. I don't entirely know what is fueling Obama and Joe Biden. I would love to know.
Well, rolling back, so we were talking about getting to a resolution, and you said the two-state solution is not viable.
Nope.
It hasn't panned out thus far. So what's the solution? Because the only other option is to eradicate.
The solution for Gaza, which is the most creative idea in the world, and I truly pray that the politicians, if we can get Republicans in 2024, that they will be able to institute this, is to take the railroad that runs through Saudi Arabia and to connect it through Israel into Gaza. What do the Saudis get? They get a port. They get a duty-free port. They get access to the Mediterranean. The United Emirates can join in too and start showing the Gazans how to build business. What do we need from them? Internal security. Muslims can police Muslims. They also can institute the same thing that they did in the United Arab Emirates in Gaza. What does that mean? No Hamas, no extremist Islam, no indoctrination of kids, no Hamas war camps during the summertime. Israel can stay on the periphery, and it's possible that within a generation, within 20 years, within 30 years, you would then have another culture that would grow, and there would be some kind of real reform and modernization, maybe to the point where Egypt would love to annex Gaza. Who knows? But it would open up opportunities.
And where would that railroad go through?
It would go through the southern part of Israel and then directly into Gaza. Where in Gaza? I don't know. Wherever there's a deep port, and I know that there's one there. There's also an airport there that still exists. But if you...
So definitely through Gaza is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. That's the thing. Allow them to help Gaza out of their situation and have Israel just simply sit on the periphery of Gaza and not enter. Israel does not want to take Gaza back. Nobody wants that.
And is this not something that can't be done under a peace? Because right now, real people like you and I and Ashley and Ron sitting here are not getting food, water, and electricity. They've actually, the Israeli government has called them dogs. Why is peace not an option in the short term to develop these long-term plans?
You mean today?
Ceasefire or peace? Which, is that one interchangeable? Okay.
So right now, Hamas is still, whatever is left, they're still in charge. Iran is still in charge. And you have a population that the truth of the matter is that most people don't want to talk about that supports them. Not everybody, but the overwhelming majority of them do. If you read the Hamas charter, all you have to do is understand that these are people who are... They have a quote from the Quran there about one day where, that they will find every Jew hiding behind a tree and they will kill them and they want everybody dead. It's very difficult to negotiate for peace with people that want you dead.
Agreed. How do you eradicate completely a terrorist group?
I think that what you do is, unfortunately, you have to bring them completely... You have to completely bring them to their knees. I'm not saying that I've got some kind of military insight to what Israel is doing, that I understand in great detail how to do that. I think that you first have to wipe it out. And, listen, the fact of the matter is that we asked the Japanese to surrender at least twice. They didn't. We threw 2 A-bombs on them. They did then. And then we rebuilt the country, and they're one of our greatest allies.
But Gaza is a little bit smaller than Japan.
It is, definitely. But if the question that you're asking, and I'm not sure that you are, but if the intent of your question is essentially what is acceptable as a response, my answer to you is that it's the wrong question. The amount of people that need to be eradicated are not one more than it would take to bring peace. If that's one person, then the second would not be justified.
As part of the problem with so many innocents being killed is that the Hamas fighters are integrating themselves in with the civilian population, with children and in hospitals. Is that not part of the problem?
That's been happening the whole time. Hamas could end this all right now. They could end this all right now. They could put up a white flag, and they can give up all the hostages. And then the people who really run Hamas are in Qatar, and they're each worth about $3 to $4 billion apiece, these great freedom fighters that everyone looks up to. They are living in the lap of luxury. Their kids go to expensive clubs, eat expensive dinners. They have drivers and bodyguards and the rest of it. And this is a cash cow for the people that are on top of Hamas. And Hamas is the problem, that the Gazans are being held hostage by Hamas. And one of the last things I want to say is that to all the well-meaning people that are trying to figure out a way to end this and are talking about the innocent people in Gaza that are dying, the quickest way to end this is to have the world collectively say, enough, put down your guns, surrender, or else. And
seems like all the pressure is on Israel.
Well, all the pressure is on Israel, but again, this is a problem where the world does not understand Islam. Islam understands strength, and the reason why is because of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which is a very important element to understand in Islam. You have the first half, which is Mecca. You have the second half, which is Medina. I'm not going to go into all of that, but when he gets back to Mecca, he realizes that he is not strong enough to take Mecca. So what does he do? He allows himself, and Muhammad is the perfect being. You're supposed to pattern your behavior on him if you are a Muslim. And he gives him a treaty for 9 years, 9 months, and 9 weeks, and 9 days. And 2 years later, the people in Mecca get lazy, and he slaughters all of them. But the idea there is that if you are against an enemy that is stronger than you are allowed to lay low and to be still and to have a temporary truce. So we could have a temporary truce for 1,000 years while we get the United
complacent.
Well, we can't stay complacent, but while that's in place, we can then get the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates and the people from Bahrain to Gaza and let them rebuild it, because it's going to be a lot easier for them, culturally speaking, to have other Muslims help them rebuild Gaza.
So just to clarify, you said that the elites in Qatar are pulling the strings for the Hamas?
It's mostly in Iran, and Qatar is supplying a lot of the money.
Okay, so we're looking at kind of two different countries, or elites in two different countries, basically.
You're looking definitely at Iran 100%. Qatar is the other one. And real quick, because this actually has something to do for me personally in West Virginia, interestingly enough. Why do we deal with Qatar? Qatar sponsors terrorism. Why does the United States deal with them? You want to know why?
Oil?
Gas, natural gas.
Natural gas.
How much natural gas do we have here in West Virginia?
A lot.
It's huge.
We could be drowning in it.
Yeah.
We could be drowning in it. We could be the world's largest producer.
Then we wouldn't have to deal with governments like Qatar, and then actually we would have a lever on them rather than them having a lever on us.
And remember that when you vote.
Right.
Yes,
We've
please.
got about a minute left, so
That's the thing. That at least you just said it. Educate yourself, like we're trying to do, and then go to the polls and vote.
we've got about a minute left. You want to just kind of give us where you think we're going to go from here?
I'm somebody who prays for peace, for all of this to end, and for all of this to be the thing that helps build, all these countries and all these cultures to move forward.
How can our listeners learn more, and how can they contact you?
They can contact me through. That's a good question.
Well, I'm looking at your email
Do you
address.
want them to contact you?
I'm sure they could find me through Faith and Freedom, which is the West Virginia chapter.
Right.
There's an email there for Curtis.
That's fine.
And he could always find me.
They can also message us through our Facebook page on the,
Yep.
the
Right.
Scoop Squad.
Yep.
Right. Do you have any a website that they could learn more, or is it just a part of Faith and Freedom site?
I think that Faith and Freedom has some of my op-eds from there.
Okay.
You can go and check things out. But I would here's something that I would tell anybody who is listening this. Do your own research. Find credible people online. You can tell the real people from the fake ones. And I would also say to somebody who is absolutely totally convinced that Israel is the enemy and someone is just pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas or whatever, or anti-Israel, I would ask yourself this question. Why do you think that? It takes me about 100 to 200 hours of study of the Middle East and these religions to know what I'm talking about. And if you don't know these things, do you really think these things? Or are you just a puppet for somebody else?
Right.
And if you truly do because you're educated, that's fantastic. But if you don't know the history, the culture, the geopolitics, how this whole thing plays
And you're not going to get that just by watching TV news. CNN.
You're definitely not going to get that.
You're not going to get the whole story.
Exactly.
Well, we've got to go because we are out of time. But
Thank you all so
Hey,
much.
I want to
Max,
thank
thank
you
you
for
so much for
coming.
coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa.
And the dogs seem to enjoy it as well.
Right.
They sure did.
They got some nice loving during the interview. Again, Max, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for
Elisa,
having
thanks
me
for
here.
coming.
I appreciate it.
Again,
And-
Max Fisher from Faith and Freedom,
Yeah.
the
And-
West Virginia chapter.
Wait,
Yep.
I need to say about the dogs, the war dogs, one more time.
WarDogGuardians.org.
There you go. I
Yep.
love that. All right, and we will talk at you next week, Charleston. Actually, stay tuned because there's a possibility. Ron's looking at me with his eyes wide open because I usually
Where
spring
are we
these
going?
things on him.
Where are we going?
It's possible that we will have another special edition this week.
Okay.
Just letting you know.
Okay.
So I might see you in 2 days. Okay.
You people just better reserve some time to listen to
there's
some
just
podcasts.
not a shortage of news around here in Charleston. I
Great.
mean, you're a small town, but there's a lot going on.
Thank you.
All right, we will talk at you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
If you would like to tie your business with this popular podcast, you can contact me, Ron Hughes, to advertise at ron.hughes, ron.hughes, at wvradio.com, or you could call me at 304-342-8131. The Scoop Squad Truth Pod would like to thank our sponsors. Those include Chris Walters at Integrity Insurance, featuring auto, home, life, business, workers' compensation, and pet insurance. Pet insurance, you say? That's health insurance for your dogs or cats that covers special foods, illnesses, surgeries, and medication. They're on 16 Capitol Street in Charleston at 346-9181, or reach them at www.iigwv.com. Also by Jody's Mobile Services, offering steam cleaning, pressure washing, fleet washing, and auto detailing. We come to you. They're at 304-437-3164. And also by Eggplant on Bridge Road. Anything but ordinary. Go to eggplantshop.com. Also by T-Graphics on the west side, 312 Buchanan Street, 345-4816. Go to tgraphics.com for screen printing and embroidery since 1984. Again at 345-4816. Rebroadcast, retransmission, or transcription is not permissible without the expressed approval of Scoop Squad Truth Pod. Copyright 2024.